I live close enough to Shenandoah that I can smell woods and smoke on the first cool nights of October. The mountains sit on the horizon like a promise you can keep. And Old Rag pulls harder than the others because it's the one we all grew up hearing about. I've done the Ridge Trail from Nethers plenty of times. Shoulder to shoulder with weekend traffic, helmets of headlamps bobbing in a slow line through the boulders. This time I wanted quiet. My friend Ben felt the same. We're local, mid-30s, decent fitness, not out there to impress anyone. We both carry paper maps because batteries die and printers don't. We decided to take the Berry Hollow approach, go up in the late afternoon for the color, eat a sandwich on the summit, and then come down by Fire Road with headlamps. It was a Saturday with a high around 60 and the kind of light that knocks the edge off everything. The leaves were just past peak, and you could hear them underfoot, a steady, dry hiss. We left the Berry Hollow lot at 3:30 p.m., signed the trail register, and started up Weekly Hollow Fire Road like we were walking a gravel driveway to somewhere no one had lived in 50 years. The plan was simple because simple plans survive contact with real terrain up the fire road. Take the saddle trail to the summit, be on top by 6 o'clock to watch the last warmth bleed out of the day. Then reverse it in the dark, headlamps on low, and be back at the car around 9:30 p.m. We checked our watches against the map at every junction out of habit. Ben had trekking poles and a small first aid kit he actually knows how to use. I had a compass clipped to my shoulder strap and a folded USGS quad in a Ziplo. Between the two of us, we had the headlamps, a spare, and enough batteries to be annoying to carry. We were not heroic. We were just two guys who'd rather walk a longer gravel approach than play human Tetris through the Ridge Trail rock gardens at prime time. The fire road made good time. The grade was steady and kind. A pair of white-tailed deer crossed 50 yards ahead and stopped like they were listening to something deeper in the woods. We didn't think about it. October in the Appalachian hills is full of noises that make sense until they don't. We reached the Saddle Trail turn at 4:40 p.m. and climbed without talking much. The air was clean in that way you only notice after a summer of haze. We drank at the spring out of a filter and moved on. Hands to rock in a few places, but nothing like the Ridge Scramble. On the summit at 6:05 p.m., we shared a stale hoagie and a bag of peanuts. The sun dropped behind a low ceiling of cloud and the park glowed. Ridge line stacked on ridge line, blue ridge running off to the south like a spine. We checked our lamps before leaving and let the last group pass us heading for Nethers. After they were gone, it was just the wind and the quiet tick of grit under our boots. At 6:45 p.m., we started down, taking our time because ankle turns happen when you rush. The first 1,000 FT went by clean, had lamps on low. The trail markers were where they should be. We made the junction with the fire road just after 8 o'clock and turned right toward Berry Hollow with the confidence of people who've done this enough not to second guess us. The mistake was almost nothing. A faint turn we didn't take and a faint track we did. It happens like that. You follow what looks like an old road that leaves your main line at a reasonable angle. The grade feels right. The surface is compacted by long ago tires. Maybe a CCC truck back when they were cutting fire breaks. And the footbed is honest rock and dirt under the leaves, not just stuff. So, we kept going, talking about how late Skyline Drive stays open and whether the bear population is up this year. 10 minutes in, I noticed a stick in the ground on the right, chest high, shaved on one side with green cambium showing. It wasn't a Park Service blaze, it wasn't trail maintenance. It looked like something someone did yesterday or the day before. Ben spotted another one left of the track. Same height, same fresh knife work. We stopped, lamps down at our feet so we didn't blow what little night vision we had, and stared at the sticks without knowing exactly why they bothered us. We kept walking because that's how you find out if a thing is nothing or something. The grade started to fold slightly and I felt a steady tug in my calf, the way you do when you're not losing elevation as quickly as you should be. The track narrowed, the shaved sticks kept appearing. Not regular like a survey, but frequent enough to say, "Follow this." There was no paint, no metal tags, only fresh cuts still wet at the wound. Sap shining where the knife had peeled it open. At 8:20 p.m., Ben's foot jerked backwards so fast his trekking pole clacked off rock. He cursed and stumbled. I caught his shoulder and he lifted his leg. A loop of monofilament was around his ankle, shin height, almost invisible until you saw it. He lunged backward and it tightened, bit skin, and then popped. The end whipped across my knee and vanished into the leaves. Ben stood still and breathed, jaw hard, eyes adjusting to what we just learned. I put my lamp on high and swept the path. 10 yards ahead, another loop, a whisper line suspended between two little stakes, low enough to catch deer, high enough to foul a human stride if you weren't looking for it. These weren't the kind of hobby snares kids make with paracord and no plan. The line was heavy, clear, hard to see until it wasn't. The sticks weren't random. We turned our lights to the ground and found 3 more loops and a fan around a faint game trail that dropped into the laurel. Ben didn't step. He used his poles to press each loop slack until we could see it and then lifted it off the stakes without tripping whatever it was tied to. There was a knot we didn't like the look of. He set it down like it might bite. I said the obvious thing, we were in the wrong place. Whoever said this didn't mean us well and didn't want company. I checked the compass. The needle said we were heading south-southeast, which fit where the main fire road should have been, but the grade said we were not going where we thought. I folded the map out by headlamp. The lines of the contour made sense until I pictured the sound of water, could suddenly hear off to our right lower, then the track steady enough to be a drainage that would lead to Weekly Hollow if we were stuck in some relict skid road that ran out at a dead end. We didn't decide anything yet. We moved forward 3 steps at a time, deliberate, scanning for line. The flashlight behind us clicked on without warning. Not the soft glow of an accidental bump. Not the friendly sweep of a hiker adjusting a strap. It was a narrow, hard beam that caught our backs and then cut off. No words. The beam didn't come back. Just that single snap of light, cold and close enough to bracket us in. We both went still. I heard my breath in my hood and the small hiss of Ben's nose when he gets angry. The woods to our right broke like something heavy had chosen not to walk quietly anymore. Not deer on a line through oak leaves. Not a raccoon working its way downhill. Wait, purpose. Whoever had the light was behind us on the track. Whoever was breaking brush was chasing us out of sight to the right up slope. We didn't talk. We didn't turn. Ben kept his poles up and I put my lamp back to low and pulled the brim of my cap down so the light didn't flare my eyes. The track dipped and then flattened. I could hear water more clearly, a narrow flow rather than a broad run, stones clicking under it every few seconds. I said drainage and Ben said weakly, like we were translating for each other. We both knew that if we could get into the watercourse, we could follow it down without leaving a clean set of tracks on dry ground. I checked the compass again by cupping the light with my palm. South was still where south should be. We made a choice without calling it bravery. We stepped off the track into laurel that had grown thick across old cut, branches springy and close, leaf surfaces glossy like wet leather. It grabbed our sleeves and stuttered our steps the way laurel always does. We moved parallel to the track for maybe 20 feet and then angled downhill toward the sound of water. Headlamps on low. Beams pointed at our own boots. The break in the brush kept pace above us. 1 set of steps, 1 wait, not rushing, not backing off. We went down until our ankles hit chill and the water soaked our socks. Ben hissed and then steadied. The little stream was only 2 feet wide, a ribbon of cold on rock, but it ran in the right direction. I motioned with my hand. Finger down, we killed our lights and let the dark join us. When your headlamp goes off after an hour of use, the first minute is blind, and then you realize you can still move if you accept the night. The sky had a little milk to it, and the leaf litter under the water actually reflected more than I expected. We put our heels down first, then rolled to our toes, sliding, trusting the poles in the rock. We shuffled in the bed itself, so the water took our noise and smeared it. upslope. The brush movement slowed like whoever it was had lost sight of us or was listening hard. We kept the stream between us and the old track. Twice I felt monofilament on my shin and stopped before it tightened, just a whisper across damp hair. I pressed it with my palm to see the line and bent low to lift it over my foot, holding it away from whatever anchor lay under the leaves. It felt wrong to break them. It felt wrong to leave them. Both choices were the kind that make you feel seen. A metal clatter rang behind us at 8:55 p.m. It was small but sharp, not rock on rock or pull on granite, but hardware singing against itself. A paw snapping, a spring shaking, then a single breath from upslope. Short, sharp, pulled in through teeth and let out through nose, like someone had walked into the same nearly invisible line we'd been walking through and hadn't expected it. The kind of exhale you can't rehearse. We didn't increase our pace much because speed makes noise and noise draws eyes, but something in me let go of patience. The stream bed narrowed and the banks grew armored with roots, the laurel tangled in the overhead. We moved hunched, then crawling. The water soaked our sleeves. We stopped using the poles because they made too much sound. We used our hands. That's when I hit the deadfall. It was laid across the drainage at chest height, a trunk down from a windstorm or a set piece arranged with intent. My lamp was still off, but my hands knew it was wrong. Bark scraped my knuckles, and then something sliced at them with a kind of tidy impatience. I backed off and clicked my beam to the smallest useful circle and saw the line's monofilament again. 3 loops in layers like a spider that learned geometry. The loops were set to catch what crawled under and what tried to go over. If you ducked, you took it on the neck. If you climbed, you took it in the knees. There was a 4th loop attached to something heavier that led off to the left, vanishing behind the log. Ben slipped next to me and did the same thing. He used his poles to rake the loops away from the log, pressing down with enough force to pop tiny sticks out of the mud and lift the lines clear of our path. He worked the points under each loop and put his weight on them until the loops slid off the deadfall and drooped like lazy vines. We could have crawled under that arrangement at full speed and never felt it until it was too late. We went under on hands and knees anyway, slow, faces down in wet leaf, rock punching our ribs and wrists. The quartz in the bed was rough and sharp. It took skin from my knuckles in long, clean scrapes. I didn't feel the sting until later. Past the deadfall, the stream opened for a stretch and then choked again. We stayed low. Twice more, we found lines strung at odd heights where no hiker would think to look. Once there was bait wired to a stub. A rotten apple half buried in leaves flattened into the mud so the sugars ran into the water. The smell was sweet and wrong. The kind of wrong you pretend you do'n't know for a second to give yourself one more decent minute. We didn't talk. We saved our breath for moving and hearing. The light behind us came back once. A quick white bar across the laurel, then gone. It marked us like a pen on a map. Right here, still here, and then it was dark again. The steps stayed upslope, matching our speed, never closing to within 10 yards and never drifting far. Whoever it was knew the country or baited it into knowing them. At 9:35 p.m., we hit a small flat where the drainage split around a low hump and rejoined. The ground there was matted with leaves and old deer beds. Our lights were still off. I could see the V of the water and the aiming point where both branches met. I put my hand on Ben's pack and squeezed once. He leaned back into it like he'd been waiting for an excuse to feel another human being. The night had a temperature you could sense in your teeth. A barred owl called down valley, and that small ordinary sound made the rest of it more strange. When we moved again, I felt something tap my boot toe and hang. I stopped because I didn't want to pull whatever it was taut. I eased my foot back and saw another cable heavier than monofilament and covered in gray plastic. One end was fixed in a figure eight to a stake, and the other disappeared into leaves on the far bank. I lifted it with a stick and found a cable restraint large enough to take a deer around the neck. There was another 1 feet away, with a loop made smaller pigtailed around a stick in a way that would leave a smaller head tight and low. I put it down without touching the trigger. Ben shook his head once, angry in a tired way. Not surprised anymore, we stayed in the water. The night took our body heat in small taxes. My knuckles bled in thin sheets that the stream licked clean. Somewhere upslope, the brush gave way to open timber. We could tell because the pacing steps changed rhythm and the sound came through cleaner. We never got a glimpse of whoever it was. No smell, no voice, just the fact of a person who thought he owned the dark. The water angled a degree to the east, and I could feel the bed flatten underfoot. The stones pressed less and the flow widened. That meant we were near the broad grade of Weekly Hollow Fire Road, where cross drainages spread before passing beneath culverts. I checked the time and felt a flash of relief that made me nauseous. 10:58 p.m. We were going to hit something graded and real if we could get another 1/4 mile without getting stooted into a loop set for a creature that didn't know it was being counted. We turned our lamps back to their lowest setting for the last stretch because breaking a leg 20 minutes from safety is still breaking a leg. We let the water go left where it wanted to, climbed the right bank on hands and then belly, and then stood up in a tunnel of laurel that shook its wet leaves down our necks. The first thing I saw when the tunnel broke was a pale strip that caught the sky. The kind of crushed stone you see on park fire roads. I put my palm to it and felt the salt of maintenance and the compacted grit that holds tire prints for hours. We stepped onto Weekly Hollow Fire Road at 11:10 p.m. My watch ticked the minute over as my boots found a surface that didn't try to argue with me about where it was headed. We didn't look back. We didn't play tough. We turned right toward the Berry Hollow lot and walked. Ben kept one pole half raised like a spear for 100 yards and then let it come down. I didn't say anything because words sometimes invite things to keep happening. We passed a culvert. We passed another shaved stick stuck like a sign in the ditch, and I kicked it out without breaking stride. We kept our lamps low and our pace steady. Not jogging because jogging makes you blow your breath out hard and your hearing goes with it. We listened for the brush steps and heard only our own gear creak and the small drum beat of water under the culverts. The night settled around us like a normal night again. At 11:37 p.m., the glow of the lot came through the trees. I smelled hot brakes before I saw the idling cruiser, the sweet chemical warm that says a car hasn't been off long. A Madison County deputy sat in the driver's seat with his arm up on the window. He had his hat off and a radio mic against his shoulder like he'd been talking to someone and didn't want to get out of the groove. He saw our lamps and got out of the car. Not fast, just the way someone gets out to be a public servant again after a minute of peace. He said, "Evening. Everything okay?" in a tone that offered the next step if we wanted it, I said. We just came down a sidetrack full of snares, and my voice sounded clipped like I'd chewed on it. He looked past us into the dark and then back at our hands and ankles. Ben's shin had a thin white line where the loop had taken a bite, and my knuckles were scraped and clean in the way that only cold water can manage. The deputy asked us to stand near the front of his car and keep our packs on. He keyed his mic and called a ranger, used language that wasn't for show. He took our names and phone numbers, asked exactly where we'd left the main road and what we'd seen. We gave him what we had. Shaved sticks with wet cambium, monofilament loops at shin height, a deadfall across a narrow drainage with multiple loops set at different heights, at least to cable restraints, one baited. We told him about the flashlight behind us on and off once and the steps up slope that matched our movement all the way down. He didn't waste time doubting. He asked if we wanted M's and we both shook our heads. He looked at Ben's ankle again. "You'll want to clean that line bite," he said, like a dad who knows what a cut looks like before it turns. We stayed while he got the ranger on scene. It didn't take long. The ranger's truck came in quiet, lights down until the last curve, then up so no one with a reason to run could pretend they hadn't been seen. She stepped out with a canvas bag and a notebook. She asked the same questions in a way that put them on paper where they could help us later if they needed to. We showed her our hands, We showed her the slice across Ben's shin. She asked if we were willing to walk her to the place in the morning where we left the main road and show her the sidetrack. We said yes. She looked at the deputy and said she'd sweep the lot for other cars, and maybe the guy with the flashlight was sitting in one like it was any regular Saturday night. The deputy stayed put for a while. We drove home slow because your brain doesn't let go of certain speeds right away. I found dried blood on my knuckles at a stoplight and laughed once without humor. In the shower, the scrapes lit up red and then calmed to clean lines. At 8 o'clock in the morning the next day, we met them at Berry Hollow. The same ranger, another from law enforcement, and a tech with a kid I recognized from a class one took years ago. We walked them back up the fire road to the place where the sidetrack peeled off. It hid in the leaves like a snake laid out for the sun. We wouldn't have seen it in daylight if we weren't looking. The shaved sticks were still there, and the cuts had browned a little, but were fresh enough to match our story. We let the rangers go first. They moved as if the ground might argue. We followed the way we had, 3 steps at a time, eyes down. It took less than 5 minutes to find the first loop. The tech took photos and then measured the line with a small tape. He tagged it before the ranger clipped it, bagged it, and then marked the stakes with flagging of her own. We kept going. 10 yard, another loop, 15 yard. 2 more near a game trail. I had a steady feeling that we were counting to a number someone else already knew. When we dropped into the drainage, the deadfall was where we left it. The loops still hung there. They were threaded with how many leaves had come down in the night. The ranger used Ben's method with her own pulls, pressed them down, and walked it like she'd been taught, kneeling to show the tech exactly how a person would take skin off on the quartz if they didn't see what was waiting. My knuckles lined up with the gritty scars in the stone like the halves of a plan. A little farther down, they found the baited cable restraints. One had the rotten apple still wired to the stick, and the other had bait I could identify in a bag that smelled like cold salt and something animal. They took it all. When we reached the place where we'd heard the metal clatter, there was a sprung device off to the side. The paw cocked and the trigger tripped, but the cable it controlled was gone. The tech looked up the slope and pointed to places where a person had pushed through the laurel and scuffed the soil. He kept his mouth shut otherwise, which I respected. By 10:30 a.m., the sidetrack looked naked. A dozen illegal snares cut and tagged, the cable restraints bagged with their bait and stakes. The ranger told us they'd post a bulletin and ask for information. She said she'd seen a pattern like this before in the spring on the other side of the hollow. The spacing and stick height matched. The bait matched. The use of both mono and cable matched. She said it out loud so it could be written down. This wasn't random. Someone was working in a legal line on public land, and they'd been at it long enough to get comfortable. We gave our statements and a few photos we'd taken of our own scrapes, because the dates would matter later if someone asked us to swear to it. We left the park at noon and ate in Sperryville without saying much about any of it. Ben's shin had a swelling to it by then, and the white line had gone pink in a way you don't like to see after a night in wet socks. A week later, the park put the bulletin out. I saw it on the Shenandoah page and at the kiosk in the Berry Hollow lot when I drove up to look at the sign. It described illegal traps and asked for tips. It included a line about the pattern matching a poaching case from spring. Same working area, same style of line, same bait. The phone number was one you could remember if you had to. A month after that, a follow-up went quiet on the web, but loud in the way the rangers talked about it when you asked in person. They'd made an arrest tied to those traps. They didn't share a name. They didn't need to, not to me. They'd closed the sidetrack with a sign that said, "Closed area, resource protection," in the tone of voice a park uses when it's tired of cleaning up after people. The sticks with shaved cambium were gone. The loops were gone. The deadfall still lay across the drainage like any other wind throw. The quartz still had the little arcs on it where my knuckles had found purchase. Ben has a small scar across his ankle where the loop took skin. It's a faint line that disappears in winter and shows up again when his tan returns, like a watermark for a thing he'd rather not think about. My knuckles smoothed out and then left thin tracks you can only see when my hands are cold. None of that matters much compared to what those lines could have done to a deer or a dog or a kid who followed a soft road the way we did. We didn't save anyone, we just found it and did the next thing. The deputy was where he needed to be. The ranger knew how to make a K-stick. The park did what it could with the land it has and the people who pushed their luck on it. I still walk Old Rag, usually early on weekdays, Ridge Trail when I feel like scrambling, and Berry Hollow when I want to be left alone. I step past the new sign like it's a sentence laid down by a court I respect. When I reach the junctions, I check the map even though I don't need to. It takes no time to make sure you're where you mean to be. And when the wind moves in the laurel, I listen not because I'm frightened, but because I understand the difference between the ordinary noises of these mountains and the ones a person makes when he thinks he owns a small piece of the night. I planned the trip because I was the one who kept talking about Hazel Creek like it was a place you could step into and see a whole town folded up in the trees. I read about Proctor and the old home sites and the cemeteries that still get visited by families when the park helps with access. Late fall looked right for trout and for walking without crowds. It wasn't an impulse. I called Fontana Marina, booked the hiker shuttle, and set out gear on my garage floor in neat rows the way I always do. Two friends came with me, Jess, who ties a better clinch knot than anyone I know, and Marco, who handles fire and food without any fuss. We wanted tonight's. We wanted to camp legal, cook early, and go see the foundations and the stonework before dark. We cut the tech to a minimum and printed maps. The idea was to keep it simple. Boat across, camp near Proctor, wander up the old roaded, visit the cemetery up near Bone Valley Trail, fish Hazel Creek, and be back at the marina after the second night with tired legs and good stories. That's the plan I explained to my wife before I lost service on Highway 28. She asked me to text a thumbs up from the dock if the boat left on time. I said I would. The morning we crossed, Fontana Lake was flat and gray. The driver from Fontana Marina ran the ferry steady down the lake. You get the sense out there that the shoreline is bigger than it looks on a map. Long coasts open and close like hallways. The air had that wet leaf smell you get when the first hard frosts still haven't locked everything down. We piled our dry bags near the bow so we could unload fast. Nothing felt strange. It felt quiet in the way it gets when everyone on a boat stops talking because they know they lines have to carry whatever they say with them all weekend. The ferry nosed into the Hazel Creek landing us before midday. The driver helped us slide the kayaks off and warned us about bears like they always do. We shouldered packs, dragged the holes up past the high water line, and tucked them behind a screen of alders with a deadfall notch we could find later by headlamp if we had to. The old road in is wide and smooth at first. We walked it to Backcountry Campsite 86 and found 3 flat spots on gravel and leaves. The water was clear and cold. We hung our permits and bear lines, set the stove on a rock, and cooked around 1 o'clock in the afternoon to get it done before evening. After we ate, we walked the short way up to the Calhoun house because it's always the obvious thing to do when you get there. I'd seen pictures, but seeing it stand there with the empty windows and the boards and the frame all squared up against the hillside made the place feel like a job site someone just stepped away from. We still had daylight, so we took our rods and a small day bag and headed up the old road toward the Bone Valley Junction. You pass old terraces where houses stood, and you can pick out where a fence line once ran if you look for line-straight rocks and flat spots. It's not loud. Hazel Creek talks in the background. I kept an eye on the map and the blazes where they still exist. The wide grate pinched and then opened again as the creek swung in and out. It's easy walking. We talked about the way people had to pack out when the dam went in and how some of the family cemeteries only get visited now by way of organized trips. I made a point to say we'd keep our distance and not step anywhere we shouldn't. Nobody argued. We reached the Bone Valley Trail junction in the kind of light you get when the afternoon has started tilting to evening. The air cooled. We cut right on the side path toward the cemetery. The ground climbed, then leveled. The wire fence around the cemetery set tight and squared. Inside, a dozen or so headstones stood in the grass and leaves. And off-center, near a tree, there it was, a rectangle of fresh, dark soil cut in with a shovel. The edges of the rectangle were straight, like someone had taken time to chop them down with a flat blade. The dirt piled beside it was wet and crumbly in a way soil does not get from animals or from weather alone. A long-handled shovel leaned against the fence post. Behind a headstone, tucked in like someone meant to hide it from a casual glance, sat a 5-gallon bucket with a folded black contractor bag inside. The bag was still creased like it hadn't been unfolded yet. The shovel handle had a thumb smear of mud near the top where a right-handed grip would be. We stopped moving. I looked over my shoulder along the path we'd come up. Nothing. I took one step closer and saw a small soot ring in the leaves just outside the fence where a low lantern or a small stove had burned. Next to it, a scorched can lid. The marks were recent. The ground around the rectangle had boot prints that overlapped. Someone had been standing there and shifting feet. The prints led back toward the lower slope, not deeper into the ridge. I didn't touch the shovel. I didn't step inside the fence. Jess took the bucket and checked it. It was empty except for the folded bag. She set it down near her boots. "This looks like work in progress," she said. Marco stared at the rectangle. He has a way of keeping emotion out of his voice when things turn serious. "We should not leave this as we found it," he said. "But we also should not touch anything else." We had a fast conversation about what to do. The weather was good. It was not yet dark. We had a legal camp half a mile back. We could carry the bucket out and hand it to rangers in the morning with exact directions. Or we could walk it all the way back to the landing and try to flag someone down on the lake who had a radio. Jess said if we left now, we'd be walking the old road at dusk with a bucket that belonged to whoever dug that rectangle, and whoever dug it might already be on the way back. I said we leave the shovel, step off the path carefully so we don't step on anything fresh, and check the slope below for a camp or a stash. We split eyes instead of splitting bodies. None of us wanted to separate. We found a trampled line where the leaves had been pressed down, not a full path, just a lane. It ran a long contour to a patch under rhododendron where someone had cleared a low spot. That's where the soot ring had come from. A plastic bottle with the top cut off lay upside down with wax pulled inside it like a mold. There were dispensed solid fuel tabs nestled into the leaves, burned out to chalk. A thin piece of rebar, about as long as a man's arm, lay half under the brush, one end shiny from use, and the other end muddy, the kind of tool used to pry or poke. The rebar wasn't there by accident. We stood still and listened for any movement. I realized I had been moving my eyes the way you do when you know someone could be close, taking in small triangles of ground, building a map in my head of where hands and feet might come from if someone rushed out. I didn't hear anything. The creek kept up the same sound it always had. The woods weren't broadcasting anything strange. The strange thing was right in front of us, a grave plot just starting, a bucket and a bag, a lamp mark and a pry bar. We went back up to the fence. Jess picked up the bucket. She said she wanted something to show that we weren't imagining things if we had to explain it to a ranger at midnight. I checked my map and made a note with a pencil, old habit, dot by dot, so I could find the angle back if someone moved the shovel. I noted the name on the nearest headstone and the fence post with a bent staple. Then we left. We walked at a steady pace and didn't look back more than a couple times. The light in the creek valley was going soft. I could feel the cold coming up off the water. We came around the bend where the site sat and I saw a flame inside our fire ring. A low fire, the kind that makes a lot of heat for one or two people who don't want to be seen far away. Two men stepped out from the corner of the site where we'd left the bare lines. One had a length of rebar in his right hand, The other had a pack with square corners that stood out against his jacket like they were hard boxes inside. Tool shapes, not clothing. Neither of them said a word. The one with the rebar raised his empty hand sideways, palm out, the way a person does when they want to stop a car. He didn't wave us down. He just held it and walked a steps forward. We didn't ask questions. Talking would have given us a line to break with. Instead, the three of us stepped close to each other and turned our left shoulders forward to close the gap. The kayak sat on the gravel not 10 feet away, just above the water line where we'd left them. If you camp near the lake, you always want gear near the lake. I grabbed Jess's sleeve and we took another half step toward the boats. The man with the rebar shifted the end of it down the way you do when you mean to move something alive off the path. The square packed man stood slightly behind him and kept his feet quiet. I could see the mud on both their pants. The rebar hand had scabs on the knuckles, healed and cracked again. The rebar itself had soil pressed into the ridges. The packman had a roll of black bags tied to the webbing at his waist like a plumber or a scrap hunter. Jess still had the bucket. In that moment, I understood that the bucket was the only thing that explained our presence and our intentions, and the only thing they did not want leaving this shore. The rebar man looked at it and then at the kayaks and then at our faces. His chin dropped a fraction like he had decided on an order of operations. The packman moved his foot forward to cut off our angle to the boats. I took one small step right and felt my boot slide on a smooth stone. I bent and reached for the nearest paddle as if to keep my balance. I've never practiced swinging a paddle at a person. I didn't think about power or technique. I held the shaft with both hands and moved fast the way you move when your body decides it for you. I aimed at the wrist that held the rebar because if the rebar was on the ground, we'd have one less variable. The blade connected hard with bone. The sound was short and dry. The rebar fell and hit the gravel with the kind of sound metal makes when it's heavy and dirty. Jess threw the bucket into the fire ring, not at the men, at the coals to throw sparks and smoke up. Marco stepped through the heat and kicked the packman's knee from the side. The packman folded, not all the way, not a complete collapse, but enough that he lost his plant. The rebar man grabbed his wrist with his other hand and breathed out without a word. He bent to reach for the rebar, and I brought the paddle back around like I was drawing a line between us. "Don't," I said. "Don't do it." It came out flat, no shout. I had zero interest in leaving them with something loud to aim at. We moved as a unit. Jess got a bow handle. Marco grabbed the stern. I shoved the first kayak toward the water and dragged the second behind it. The rebar man lunged with his good hand and went kneed when he missed the slick rock near the waterline. He swore and pulled back. The pack man pushed up and reached for the square corners of his bag. I don't know if he meant to pull something out or hold it closed. I used the paddle blade to shove the bow off the gravel. The kayak slid and rocked. Jess put both hands on the deck and climbed on her belly and then rolled into the seat. Marco pushed off and hopped into his like he'd done it 1,000 times. I'm not ashamed to say mine went ugly. I threw my thigh over and sat hard and let the boat move under me. I planted the blade and took to power strokes. The nose turned out. Marco did the same. The boats moved straight into the creek mouth, not down lake, because that gave us the steepest angle away from the place where those men stood. We crossed to where Hazel Creek opens into Fontana. It's not a mile-wide crossing there, but at dusk, with your hands shaking, it feels big. The water had no chop. The paddle found its bite. Every stroke felt like it got us 2 yards farther from bad ground. I could feel the kayak firm up under me like it always does when the hole gets past the shallows. I glanced left once and saw a light bob on the shore where we'd been. Then it went down, either turned off or dropped low behind a rock. Jess set an angle to a pale strip of cobble on the opposite bank. We moved toward it in a wedge, me behind in between, so that if someone came out in another boat, we would look like one shape, not 3. We touched gravel and slid fast up onto it and hauled both holes with wet hands to the first line of alders. We pulled them back until they were quarter hidden. Not 10 seconds, not careful, just enough. From there, we followed the shoreline point by point with headlamps on low. Keeping the water to one side gave us a guide. The shore rose and fell with small points and cuts. The air smelled like damp leaves and char from someone else's old fire. Every time I stepped on a loose cobble, my shin told me I'd done something I'd feel later. The lake took the little noises we made and erased them in the open air. We passed one finger of land with a dock at the end and then another with a small boathouse with a porch light. The kind of place you only see when you are right on it because everything is dark and the shapes run together. We crossed the last 20 yards at a jog. A dog barked once a few houses uphill. I did not slow. I balled my fist and hit the boathouse door with the meat of my hand. I hit it again and again until I heard footsteps inside. The porch light went on. A man in a robe opened the door halfway, and then all the way when he saw the three of us standing there with wet sleeves and breathing like we'd put in a lap around the lake. He didn't ask a lot of questions. He picked up a phone and called 911 and said that 3 campers were on his dock asking for help from law enforcement and the park service. He used the word urgent. He told us to sit down on a bench by the wall and lock our fingers and breathe and not go back out on the water. He said he would wait with us until someone arrived. It didn't take long. The marina had a deputy and 2 rangers meet us after they got the call. Lights came down the road to the fuel dock and then down the ramp. We walked toward them with the boathouse owner showing the way. The deputy asked if anyone needed medical care. We said no. He asked if anyone had weapons. We said no, only paddles. A ranger took our names and split us up to talk through what happened. I handed him the bucket, still damp from where we'd set it down, and told him what we saw at the cemetery. I described the shovel. I described the rectangle of soil, the soot ring, the scorch lid, the thin rebar under rhododendron. I gave him the name on the headstone nearest the disturbed area, and the count of fence posts from the corner where the wire sagged. I told him we did not enter the fence. He asked if the men said anything. I said no. He wrote that down. He asked if we saw any boats across from us when we landed to hide. I said we saw a light and then nothing. They went through our packs to make sure the only thing we had taken from the site we were describing was the bucket. They recorded the one paddle with a dark smear along the blade edge and asked me to keep it out of reach and bring it in the morning for photographs. It's not the kind of thing you ever think will happen to you on a fishing trip. A ranger writing the size and shape of a mark on your paddle, but it was a piece of the puzzle and it made sense to treat it that way. They told us to stay at the marina until morning. We unrolled sleeping pads in the lobby and slept in our clothes. Sleep is a strong word. We closed our eyes and held still and let hours pass. Sunrise is when boats make the most sense on Fontana. The water sits calm and there's no confusion about what you're seeing. A ranger boat ran us out first thing with 2 officers and the deputy. We went back to Proctor and came up from the landing on foot. Everything looked different because we had been in a fight there. And the place where you fight in the dark becomes a crime scene in daylight. Scuff marks on the gravel. A wide footprint where someone had slipped at the water line. A stripe of ash dragged where the bucket had gone into the ring. The rangers took photographs and measurements. They walked with us to the Bone Valley Trail junction and then up the side path to the cemetery. The shovel was still there. The rectangle of soil looked darker than it had in the evening because the ground it had dried a little and the contrast stood out. The contractor bag was gone from the bucket, but the bucket had a black smear around the inside rim where the bag had rubbed back out. The soot ring was still visible below the fence. The rebar under the shrubs was where we'd seen it. And this time, we found a small pack tucked back under leaves, not a backpack. More like a tool bag with a few short pry bars and a roll of bags and a cloth bundle knotted over something small and heavy. The ranger lifted the cloth with gloved hands and untied it. Inside were metal fragments, curved and brittle, the kind you see on old fence ornaments and grave decorations when they fail after decades of weather. He did not say what he thought it was. He just set it into a plastic evidence box and wrote a number on a card and slid it in with the fragments. They did not make a scene or raise voices or act like they'd never seen anything like it. They moved with a pace that said they might be close to whoever had used the shovel, and they didn't want to cause a stir that would send someone running for the lake. We went back down the path and cut to the right along the slope where the low camp had been tucked in. The fuel tab wrappers were there along with a melted patch in the forest floor where a hot piece of metal had sat. The rangers bagged everything and kept moving. By 8 o'clock in the morning, we were back at the marina. The deputy took a turn writing. He asked for a sequence of events in our own words and the time we thought we first saw the men at our fire ring. I said just before dusk. He asked us to walk him through distances. I drew on the map and pointed to a line that ran from camp to the landing to the other bank to the dock. He asked if I could identify either man. I said I could pick out the one with the rebar, because of the way he carried his wrist after I hit it and the scabs on his hand. I said the other man had a square outline on his back where the pack sat and a habit of keeping his hands low and close to his belt. It felt odd to call out details like that. It made the fight real in a way that lasted longer than the bruise on my hand. After the statements, the ranger told us he was going to post a temporary closure around the cemetery while they did a protection detail. He said they would coordinate with county law enforcement and the Park Service investigators. He did not promise charges. He did say that laws about grave tampering are clear and harsh in that part of the state, and that he had no interest in anyone believing Hazel Creek is an easy place to work a grave unseen. He used the phrase resource protection the way they do when they mean more than one thing at once. He asked if we needed escorts to go back across and retrieve the stash boats and whatever gear we left behind. We said yes. We crossed with supervision around 10 o'clock. The site looked the way we left it, except without our tents and food. The men had not come back. The cleanest sign was the absence of sign. No fresh tracks near the water. No new ash. We pulled our kayaks out of the alders and carried them down. I picked up my paddle. The smear on the edge had dried to a color that didn't look like anything else on the lake. I rubbed it with water and it lightened, but it didn't go away. The ranger took a picture of it next to a scale card and told me again to keep it handy in case they needed another look. We loaded gear back onto the ferry and rowed across. We did not stay for the day. There was nothing left that made sense for us to do on that side of the lake. We had come to fish and walk around old foundations. We had stood on a ridge at a cemetery instead and found the kind of thing you want to believe is from a story that belongs to someone else. We had fought the men on our own fire ring and crossed the lake in the dark and pounded on a stranger's door. We drove home by a route that felt shorter than the way in. My hand throbbed where it met the paddle shaft on the swing. A kind of honest pain that told me exactly what I'd done in the moment I needed to do it. That night after I set gear on the porch to dry, I went inside and opened my laptop and checked the county docket the way everyone does when they want to know if what they did mattered to anyone outside their own brief circle. By the end of the week, there was a line in the public records about a cemetery protection operation in the park and about evidence collected near Hazel Creek. The charge type listed under the docket entry made clear what the investigators thought had happened. I don't need to quote it. It wasn't vandalism. It wasn't trespass alone. It was the kind of charge you only get when someone tries to lift history out of the ground for metal or for thrills or for something they can hold in a hand and call theirs. I clicked out of the page and didn't save anything. The park posted signs at the junction about a temporary closure for protection. A friend texted me a photo of one from the next weekend. He had hiked in from the other side and said he saw a ranger walk past with a tool bag and a clipboard. He asked me what had happened and I told him the short version. We went for trout and history and found an active mess at a cemetery and ran into two men who didn't want us to carry out the proof. He sent back a thumbs up and the words, "Glad you're okay." I answered the same way. There wasn't more to say that helped. When I finally cleaned the boats, I lifted my paddle and looked at the edge again. The mark was still there. It isn't a trophy, and I don't carry it like one. It's a fact. We packed for a simple toy trip to a place I respect. We kept our camp legal and our walking careful. We paid attention. That's exactly what had to happen when we turned a corner and found things wrong. We did not chase anybody. We did not try to play ranger. We gave the right people the right information and got out of their way. The next week came and we went to work like everyone else. The map I penciled on still sits in my day pack with the dotted note and the fence post count. I haven't thrown it away. I do plan to go back and check on the cemetery or look for scars in the soil that will belong to the people who look after that ridge in those names. I know what we saw. I know what we did to get off that shore. And I know whose hands took down our story and carried it the rest of the way. 2 months later, I got a call from the ranger who had taken our statements. He thanked us for coming in when we did and for not making it bigger than it had to be. He said the temporary closure would lift once they finished the work out there and that Proctor would stay what it is. History at the edge of a big lake that hides and shows what it wants depending on where you stand. He didn't ask for the paddle. He didn't need anything else from us. He said we'd get notice if the court date required our presence. That was it. Jess keeps saying she doesn't care if we never fish that side again. Marco says he lines go anywhere with us as long as the first thing we do is check the fire ring and the last thing we do is carry the boats above the waterline. I say I-lines be the one to dial the marina next time we decide we want to see what S left from before the dam. I'll ask for an early morning ferry. I-lines switch out my paddle for a new one if that S what it takes to make another crossing. Feel like a clean start. The old one will stay in the garage where I keep spares and repair parts. If anyone asks why I don't use it, I'll tell them the truth. It's not broken. It's part of a different job now. One that S over for me with the rest of it written down in a place I don't need to carry anymore. This happened in the Dahliads Wilderness in West Virginia on the loop from the Blackbird Knob Trail, head down to Red Creek, and back out toward the Loneville side. It's a real place in the Monongahela National Forest. Big open meadows, spruce thicket, black mud that tries to eat your boots, and wind that doesn't care what month the calendar says. I was out there with my little sister and our cousin. We'd planned a simple toy loop. Forecast said clear, but windy. Dolly Sods is famous for sudden weather, but clear and windy sounded like an easy win. We expected ankle-deep crossings and packed for it. Daters, extra socks, old-school paper maps and a zip bag and a compass. I like the phone apps, but in that place I do and count on a bar of service or a battery doing me any favors. We started from Blackbird Knob late morning, call it around 9:45, and the day felt good, big sky. The plateau was doing its usual thing where you can see forever and then 2 steps later, you can't see 50 yards because a ribbon of cloud skims the grass. The trail runs like a suggestion more than a line. You get beavernals, braided paths, and spots where people and us walked around the worst mud until a side path became the new main. Posts help, Chirons help, but it's easy to drift. We weren't pushing pace. The whole point was to camp above Red Creek, take a sunset loop, and sleep to the sound of water. We moved steady, stopped for a late snack behind a clump of spruce to get out of the wind, and made our first wet crossing without drama. Gators did their job. Socks stayed mostly dry. By mid-afternoon, the light started going gold in that high plateau way that makes even the huckleberry look lit from inside. We picked a legal site up on a rise above Red Creek, flat spot, no old fire ring, far enough from the water to satisfy the rules and our own feeling about camp ethics. We pitched the tents, strung a food line well away from camp, and dropped our overnight weight. The plan was to walk back uphill for a sunset loop and return by headlamp. I've done that kind of out and back a lot. You keep your layers on, bring a small kit, and it pays off when the sky does something special. The wind was cutting by then, steady and cold. So, we went light, zipped our shells, and headed up a side ridge that had views both directions. That's when we saw the rectangle. It wasn't obvious at first. The light was going slant and the huckleberry leaves were rattling in the gusts. And I caught the shape just because it didn't look like wind. Rocks, Small ones, each about the size of a fist or a sandwich, laid in a thin line, a rectangle big enough to park a compact car. No fire ring, no sitting rocks, no trash, no tent pads. It was too neat to be random scatter and too quiet to be anything we recognized. We walked around at once without stepping inside. My sister said it looked like someone had been measuring something. My cousin said it looked like the outline of a little building. I thought it looked like a plan that didn't happen. We didn't make a big deal of it. You see weird human stuff out there all the time. Old flagging, old posts, a piece of rebar, a random pit that turns out to be a fox den or someone testing a hole. We took in the view, watched the color go, and turned back. The trail was more shadow than trail at that point. Clouds flattened what was left of the sun. Temperature dropped fast. On the way down, just above where the ridge path rejoined the main tread, we caught boot prints in a patch of damp sand, clear lugs, not ours. They split off from the main and circled toward our camp from a different direction. You know how a track looks when someone's side hills. How the edge cuts deeper on the downhill foot. It was like that. My sister noticed it first and pointed. The wind was steady and you could see the prints feeling like the grass wanted them gone. I told myself we weren't the only people camping above Red Creek on a clear weekend and kept my mouth shut. Back at camp, the creek sounded like a long, low engine. We boiled water, ate, and talked, nothing heavy. The wind kept trying to slap the flames out from under the pot, so I shielded the stove with my body until my cheeks felt tight from cold. A couple of headlamps moved far up ridge for a while and blinked out. Probably folks doing the same sunset loop we just did. We cleaned up, hung the food again, and by the time we zipped into the tents, it was late, but not crazy late. Call it 20 to 15. I sleep pretty light outside. Even with running water for white noise, I keep one ear open. Around 2310, I woke to pee. My sister muttered and rolled. Cousin didn't move. I tried to be careful at night. Had lamp on low. Keep my night vision. Know where my feet are going. Our site had one good access path, the kind of lightly trodden line that forms as soon as three people take the same steps a few times between tents and water. I swung my headlamp down and saw the shine. Not eyes, not water. A thin, hard glint right at chest height, like a spider web, but too straight. I froze. I raised my hand and found the line. Fishing line, nylon, taut. It ran from a branch at one side of the path to a stake someone had driven into the ground on the other, tied into that line. To aluminum cans, the kind that once held something sweet and cheap, each with small stones inside. My first thought was bare line, because people rig those and they recommon enough in places with food problems. The second thought landed with a weight I could feel in my ribs. This line faced into the site, not out on the approach from the main trail. Anyone walking from the camp toward the water or toward the tree I'm to pee would hit it and make noise that carried inward. We hadn't put it up, it hadn't been there when we walked in after sunset. Somebody strung it while we were cooking or after we zipped in. I killed my headlamp, stood still, listened. Wind in the branches, creek doing its steady talk. One small sound like a foot finding a flat rock up above us on the ridge. That sound you know if you've ever walked across a hillside in the dark. The quick correction step so you don't slide. I went back to the tent and laid my hand on my sister's ankle. Quiet voice close in. Don't move fast. Don't talk loud. Someone strung a line across the path, cans on it facing us. Her eyes in the dim looked like she didn't want to wake up to that sentence. She grabbed her jacket and shoes. I did the fast inventory inside my head. What stays? What goes? What gets stuffed and dealt with later? We both woke our cousin. I made my voice go low and flat, so it didn't carry. We pack now and we go. Headlamps on low. No zippers up to the top. No metal clacking. We move like people who have practiced moving quiet. If you camp a lot, you learn that rhythm. Roll the poles one by one into the body of the tent. Slide stakes into a side pocket. Coil lines by feel, Lantern off, stove into the pot. Lid on, pot in the pack, food line stays. No one needs to be under that branch messing with knots while someone watches. We shouldered loads and sidestepped to the access path. Up above, a darker shape crossed the ridge. Not a person's features. You don't get that in the dark. Nah, at that distance. Not with the wind. But the silhouette of something tall and moving along the skyline, just the way a person is tall compared to a deer or a bear. It stopped. It wasn't a tree. Then the ridge swallowed the shape and it was more wine again. We stepped over the line with the cans. I held it high and let my sister pass and then our cousin. The nylon had that squeak-tight feel under my fingers. We cut sideways through scrub to avoid our main approach and picked up a faint game trail on the downstream side. Another line, this one at ankle height, ran across it between two low spruces. 2 more cans. I pointed. My sister nodded. We stepped over it one by one. That decided our route. We weren't going back upslope into that rectangle and whoever had an interest in it. We were going to the creek and following it south. It's not the fastest way to travel, but it is honest. Water runs one direction. If you keep it to your left and you know what bend you're aiming for, you'll hit the main crossing near the forks. From there, you can climb to Lonevel. It would be a long night. Wet socks or not, the first rock hop went fine. The second slid out from under me a little and dunked my right foot, cold shot through the boot like a nail. I didn't swear. I thought about it. I kept moving. We put our headlamps on the lowest setting that allowed us to see our next steps. We didn't want to cast big beams up on the bank and make ourselves an easy line to follow. We weren't alone on that bank. I don't need to make a speech about it, and I don't need anyone to believe me. I just know what I heard and saw. Twice I heard that correction step again, the short scuff of someone adjusting their weight after a rock rolled. And twice small rocks pattered down toward the water. They didn't come flying like a throw. They came loose like a kick because the person moving was working sideways above us on the slope and their foot knocked something free. We stopped once to listen hard and count the beats between gusts. The wind set a pattern and we fit ourselves into the spaces between it. Creek low wind up footfalls won't carry, creek high, wind down, you don't move. We did that for a stretch and it kept the hair on my neck from standing full up. My sister touched my sleeve once and pointed with her chin at the bank. I didn't see anything that time, I didn't need to. We kept the water at our left and went. The creek spread into a wide bed in one section with boulders that look flat until your boot hits the algae stripe and then you re-skating. We slowed there, cousin slipped in up to mid-shin and hissed. I reached back and got a hand on their pack loop and we got through with nothing worse than more water in your shoes. The wind shoved us when we were exposed and then backed off as we ducked into strips of spruce. In the little sheltered tunnels, the air smelled like wet bark and metal, the way it does when cold water runs over iron. We took a knee behind a boulder slab to eat a bar and drink. I checked my watch face without lighting it fully, just a pulse. 33. The night felt like it had been going on for 8 hours already. My sister's lips looked pale. Cousin's hands were steady, but their eyes were wide and efficient, which is their tell when they're running a list in their head. Behind us, up on the bank, something moved again. A broken twig snapped once. Not big, just loud because we were listening for it. I looked at the slab, and my brain did the simple math of slabs and rocks and angles. If I were paralleling 3 people in the dark and wanted to see what they were doing, I'd climb to that little saddle and check. And if I didn't want to be seen, I'd stay just below the crest. That's where the sound came from. We didn't shine our lights. We didn't call out. We packed the wrappers and moved. In dolly sods, if you keep pushing south on Red Creek from where we were, you hit a place where the creek forks. There's a known crossing near there with stacked rocks that usually mark the best line. On the east bank, there's a trail up toward the Lonevel cabin side. That was the plan, creek to left, hit the crossing, up and out. The creek gave us a gift about 10 minutes later, a clean gravel bar where we could move fast and quiet for 20 or 30 yards. The sound of our steps disappeared into the wind and the water. When the gravel ended, I went back to rock, testing each step before I put weight on it. Ankle bone twinged where I'd rolled it last spring, just to remind me it had opinions. Somewhere between there and the forks, a stone came down that was bigger than the others. It hit a ledge above us and pinged once and then thunked into the dark. We all stopped and went low. My light was off, but my hand was on the button. The wind paused like the weather wanted to listen, too. Nothing else moved. No cough, no breath catch, no scramble. If you've ever waited to hear the rest of a sound that never comes, you know the way your heart throws itself against your ribs while your body tries to turn into a statue. We moved again. I cut my shin on a branch that looked like it was pointing toward the water and turned out to be a surprise spear at knee level. The blood felt warm for a second, then the wind took that, too. We passed a spot where the bank showed a clean, fresh boot track at an angle, like someone had been doing the same rock-to-rock move we were doing, but a few feet higher. The lug pattern didn't match ours. Then, like a mercy, we heard what we'd been aiming for even before we saw it. The different pitch where the forks come together and the water hardens its voice. The rocks there stack themselves thick and angular, but there's always a way through if you look. We kept the beams tight and low, found the line by feel more than sight, and crossed it. On the far side, I made myself breathe and counted it a win. The trail up from there toward La Neville climbed steady. It's not a wall, but your calves don't let you forget. We got off the rocks and onto Duffin Rights. The footing felt like a gift. Every 10 steps, we checked our 6. No movement, no snap except our own, no drift of shape crossing a skyline. The wind lost some teeth as we left the creek behind. We allowed ourselves a little more light. You could see the gravel road in your mind before you could see it with your eyes, and that kept us moving. We hit the gravel at 0140. I read it off because I wanted that number fixed in my head and not guessed at later. We stepped into the open and turned our headlamps to medium, then high. No point in being coy about it. 10. My sister pulled out her phone, and between the three of us and the high patch of sky, we got a call out. The signal wobbled, but stuck. We told the dispatcher where we were, where we'd camped, and what we'd found. She told us to stay put at the La Neville cabin side, and that someone from the county was already on nights. The deputy rolled up maybe 20 minutes later. Lights off, but presence obvious. That way only a car engine in the dark can announce itself. He stepped out alone, big flashlight under hand, voice steady, not trying to overrun the moment. We gave him the short version first. He listened close, then had us go from the beginning. He didn't ask gotcha questions. He asked backpacker questions. What time you started, where you hung food, what the lines looked like, how high they were, whether you saw a knot type that stood out, whether you saw more than one boot pattern. It calmed me down. Nothing about it felt like TV. He called Forest Service law enforcement. He told us to get warm in our car if we had one there and to stay on the gravel. We didn't have a car parked on that side. The loop plan had us going back to Blackbird Knob after another night out. So, we stood in the lee of the cabin wall and shook out our legs and hugged ourselves and felt the adrenaline turn to that deep tire you get after a long drive at the edge of your skills. Daylight changed everything and nothing the way it does. Forest Service law enforcement met the deputy and hiked in Appalachian while we gave statements again and spread our damn players out on the gravel like 3 sad flags. We could have gone back with them, but none of us wanted to meet whoever had set those lines in their own place with the day making us bold. We were already out. Out was enough. What they found is simple and specific. They found 3 separate lines of fishing line with cans. One chest high across the main access toward the water, one at ankle height across that little game trail, and one we never saw strung through a notch between 2 saplings on the north edge of the clearing. They saw a boot track pattern that circled camps, including ours. They followed prints up toward that rectangle on the ridge, and there, just off the rectangle's long side, under a scrape of turf, they found a buried tote. Inside, packaged food like the kind you buy cheap and heavy, a water filter, and a handwritten grid of dates going back weeks. Just numbers in boxes, some ticked, some blank. When I heard that, I pictured the rectangle at sunset, quiet and weird on the ridge. And I felt that cold line across my chest again. The cans waiting to sing if any one of us had sleepwalked into them. Forest Service put up a temporary notice in the area. No camping within 300 feet while they looked into it. They have to do that sometimes when a place becomes a scene. It stayed up long enough for the online folks to argue about it, and then it went away. I still don't know which thread was true and which was just the usual noise. A few weeks later, the deputy called my number back. He didn't owe us that. He did it anyway. He said they sighted a man living rough out there who had been warned earlier in the season. Not a ghost, not a campfire story that walks. A man who had claimed spots, watched routes, and rigged lines so he knew if anyone was moving where he didn't want them. He didn't say the man threatened anyone. He didn't need to. The point of a line like that isn't just to make noise. The point is to make you stop where someone chose in advance you would stop. I've camped a lot in Appalachian country. I know the difference between I don't like this and this is wrong. That night was wrong. We didn't go back to collect hanging food. We didn't feel bad about it. We bought some replacement cordage and we moved on. We also upgraded our camp shoes. That sounds like a dumb detail to end on. But after almost 6 miles of rock hopping out in wet socks, the first thing we all agreed on was that our slip-ons were trash for a hard exit. Now we each carry something that lets us move fast over stone without turning our feet into cold sponges. If I had to do that walk again, I could. I don't want to, but I could. That's the story. No jump scare at the end. No twist, just lines in the bogs. A rectangle of rocks no one explained, cans waiting to ring inward. A shadow on the ridge, and a slow kind of fear that makes you move instead of freeze. We kept the water on our left. We kept our heads low. We hit the gravel at 0140, and the deputy's flashlight cut the dark like a door opening. That was enough for me. I think about that rectangle when wind hits a ridge just right and the grass lies down in squares. I don't need to stand inside it to know what it feels like.